Okay, hi everyone. So this is part 2 of this lecture on perceptrons, lecture 3. So in part 2, we'll actually go a little bit into the optimizing the loss of the perceptrons, right? So if you recall from last time, we discussed the 0-1 loss, right? And we said that the 0-1 loss is hard to optimize, right? So this is hard to compute gradients, right? So in contrast, we saw this kind of a relaxation of the 0-1 loss, which is actually continuous and but not differentiable. Okay, so we basically saw that we need to look at a variant of the gradient descent algorithm to handle the non-differentiability of the perceptron loss, right? But the perceptron loss is continuous. That means that we can potentially use a gradient-like algorithm, which is not the case in the 0-1 loss, right? So the 0-1 loss is not continuous. Okay, so this is what I wanted to kind of emphasize a little bit if it was not clear in the last part of this lecture, right? So if you recall, a convex function, a differentiable convex function, right, has gradients, and the gradients are linear underestimators. So what it means is that these are linear lower bounds everywhere, right? So this, for example, is one example of a gradient, right? This is always basically less than the function value everywhere, right? So if this is, say, L of x as my gradient, then L of x is less than equal to g of x, right? Well, I can compute another gradient at this point, right? Again, I have a L of x, right? And L of x is less than equal to g of x everywhere. But it is tight at this point. So the point that I compute the gradient at, it will be tight on that point. So it will be equal on that point. But everywhere else, it will be less than equal to, right? So the same over here. Note that in this case, the gradient is actually 0, right? Because it's kind of flat, so it's a 0 gradient, and the 0 gradients compared to global optima, right? So this point is actually the global optima of the convex function. So this is not the case with other functions, right? Non-convex functions, but for convex functions, we know that if the gradient is 0, it's the global optimum. But in general, otherwise, this is the local optimum. Right? The point that has 0 gradient is called the local optimum for general functions, but for convex functions, the same as is the same as global optimum. Okay. All right. So now, what happens with not differentiable functions? Right. So an example of a not differentiable function is like this. In fact, the perceptron loss, in some sense, right? We saw this as well. The perceptron loss looks something like this. Right. So this is the point of non-differentiability. So this is the perceptron non-differentiability. The reason why it's non-differentiable is because if you look at the slope, right? So one point of one definition of differentiability is that you compute the gradient from the right hand side and the gradient on the left hand side, and they should match, right? So if I have a function like this, I take any point, I compute the gradient over here, and I compute the gradient slightly on the right and slightly on the left. The gradients match, so it's continuous. I mean, it's differentiable, right? So the gradients are continuous. The problem is that over here, if I go slightly to the right, the gradient is like this, right? And if I go slightly to the left, the gradient is in the opposite direction, right? So the gradients do not match on once I step slightly to the right of this point, right, x0, the point x0, if I step slightly to the right, then the gradients are one value, and if I go slightly in the other direction, they are very different value, right? So the gradients are not continuous. That's why this function is not differentiable, right? So what to do in such a case? Okay, so it turns out that we can define a subgradient over here. So this is actually an important concept called a subgradient, and a subgradient is any linear function L, right, such that L of x0 is equal to g of x0, so it's tight, right? So we saw over here that these points are tight over here, right? So this is the point where it's tight. So they need to be tight over here, right? So it should be tight, right? And it should be a linear underestimator everywhere else, right? So this point is tight, and if a function Lx is something like this, it should be less than equal to the function everywhere. So you see that this value of Lx is actually a kind of valid subgradient, right? In fact, you can also have a subgradient like this that is drawn over here, right? So sorry, I mean, if you can ignore my drawing, just the kind of red line that is drawn here, right? This is a valid subgradient, right? In fact, at the same point, you can have the subgradient over here. This is also a valid subgradient, right? And similarly, you have this zero subgradient. This is also a valid subgradient, right? This is the global optimum of this function, right? So all of these are valid subgradients. In fact, any subgradient that goes from this, so this is like a G1, which is one gradient, to G2, right? Or any gradient that belongs to G1, G2 is a valid subgradient over here. But if I draw a line like this that still passes through this point, right? So it's tight over here. This is not a subgradient. The reason why it's not a subgradient is that this is actually larger than the function on this space. Even though it is actually lower over here, it's actually larger for this region, right? So here it is actually larger. So that's the reason why this is not a valid subgradient, right? But all of these subgradients, so if I have a subgradient like this or a subgradient like this, sorry, they should all pass through that point, right? All of these are valid subgradients. So these are all valid subgradients. Okay, awesome. So basically a convex function is differentiable if it has a unique subgradient, right? So differentiable convex function has a unique subgradient, and that is exactly the gradient, right? So it's a single gradient or a subgradient, right? But for a non-differentiable functions, there can be many subgradients, right? And the set of the kind of set of subgradients. So for example, when the convex function is the absolute value of x, right? The set of subgradients is actually the set of slopes from -1 to +1, right? So this is exactly what we saw over here, where I have, say, the absolute value of x, which lies something like this. At 0, this slope is so this slope is +1, this slope is -1, right? So going from -1 to +1, all the valid slopes are kind of valid subgradients over here. So any of these slopes, for example, are kind of valid subgradients, right? The other important thing is that subgradients only exist for convex functions in general, right? So as long as the function is convex, we know that the subgradient will exist, right? And the question is, how do you compute the subgradient? Okay, so the perceptron, the goal of the perceptron algorithm is to try to minimize the perceptron loss using a subgradient descent. So it's actually a flavor of gradient descent that uses subgradients. Okay, so how do we compute the subgradients of the perceptron loss, right? So the perceptron loss, so I'll just call this L of W comma B, right? So the function of W comma B, right? So this quantity over here, the perceptron loss, I'll call this L of W comma B, right? So if you recall, this quantity is actually the sum of M from 1 to capital M. So it's my sum over my training data points, right? And then I had a max of 0 comma minus ym comma ym multiplied by f of w comma b of x of m. Okay. So over here, f of w comma b of x of m is actually exactly the linear function w transpose xm plus b, right? So this is a function that I'm using f of w comma b. So w comma b are the parameters over here in this perceptron, right? And of course my m this kind of sum is my sum on the training data. Right, so I think so far so good, right? So the question is, given this perceptron loss, max of 0, minus ym of fw blah blah blah, right? How do I compute the gradient with respect to w and the gradient with respect to b? Right, so since it's a max of 0, something, it's actually again not differentiable, right? But this function, this max of 0, something is actually a very simple function, right? So this function, as we kind of saw, because this quantity is being multiplied, right? This function, if this term ym of ym multiplied by f blah blah blah, right? If this term is actually sorry, the negative of this term, so minus of ym comma f is greater than or equal to 0, that means y multiplied by f if it's less than or equal to 0, right? That means that in that case this has a non-negative value, right? But the slope over here, in this case, the slope is actually -1, right? So that's why you have a negative sign over here. So I'll just write this down more clearly. If minus ym multiplied by f of w comma b of xm, right? If this is greater than or equal to 0, then the gradient of w of L is actually -1, right? Else the gradient of w of L is actually 0. So now why is it -1? Okay, so actually one more thing. So the gradient of this term is -1, right? Just 0, this function. Okay, but then we need to use a chain rule, and using the chain rule we also need to take the term which is inside this, right? Basically all of this term. So we need to take we need to further apply the gradient, right, with respect to w, and this is just a linear function. So now my f of wb is just a linear function, right? So the gradient of this with respect to w is just xn, and then I have a ym over here, right? So that's why I have this ym multiplied by xn, which gets multiplied outside, multiplied by this indicator function. Okay, so this is a very simple gradient of this with respect to w, right? And the same gradient actually exists now with respect to b. The only difference is that with b there is no multiplier, right? So with b is just basically multiplied by 1, right? So because with b gets multiplied by 1, I just have ym over here. So it's ym multiplied by the indicator function of minus ym times fwb of xm being greater than or equal to 0, right? And in case that this term is greater than or equal to 0 with a negative sign, then the gradient is -1, otherwise the gradient is 0. So this is the very simple gradient computation. Okay, so I think one kind of slight subtlety over here is that what to do at this point if it is exactly 0, right? That's why you have a greater than or equal to 0 over here, because if it is 0, then you basically just use -1. Right? So even if it is at the boundary case, you just use the gradient as -1. You could use the gradient as 0 as well, by the way. So you could potentially use the gradient over here being 0, right? In which case you can actually replace this indicator by being strictly greater than 0. And that is fine. That's also a kind of alternative way of doing the perceptron. Okay, but I think this is kind of an edge case because it will not be exactly equal to 0, right? In most cases, it will probably be some small positive or negative value. Okay, so this is again the gradient, right? So I think one interesting thing to keep in mind is that if the mth data point is correctly classified, right? So again, recall that it being correctly classified if ym and fwb of xm have same sign. And again, recall that fwb over here is just this linear function. So it's not the signed f, right? So I think it's a little bit confusing. I've also used f to be the sign, right? But in this case, I'm not referring to the sign. I'm actually referring to the linear function. So f of w comma b of x is basically w transpose x plus b, right? So if both of these have the same sign, that means that it will be correctly classified and the gradient will be actually 0. Okay, so I think this is kind of the critical piece, that in both cases, both the gradients are actually 0 if it is correctly classified. Okay, so now, well, that's it. I think the subgradient descent algorithm is exactly the same as gradient descent algorithm, just that I use a subgradient instead of the gradient, right? So we saw that this is the subgradient of W and this is the subgradient of D, right? So this was basically, again, I'm just using the delta sign. Typically you don't use the delta sign, use it only for gradients, but I'm kind of being a little bit lax right now and just using the delta sign of basically the perceptron loss, right? And again, this quantity is the gradient with respect to B of the perceptron loss, right? And then I just replace this particular subgradient quantity in the gradient descent, and I get a subgradient descent now, right? So again, this quantity, so if you recall, actually this term had a negative sign over here, right? So there's a negative sign, and then my gradient descent actually has WT minus the learning rate. So this is the learning rate, right? So I had minus learning rate multiplied by gradient, but because I have negative sign, it gets cancelled, then I get a plus sign over here, right? So it's WT plus this learning rate. So both of these are learning rates. Okay, this is also called the step size. It turns out that the convergence of subgradient descent actually requires a diminishing step size in theory, right? For a kind of theoretical convergence proof. Actually, okay, by the way, so I think one very important thing to kind of mention over here is that the subgradient descent also will converge to the global optima, right? So that is great. The only thing is that it got a slightly slower convergence compared to standard gradient descent like algorithms, right? But it still will converge. The only requirement is that in theory you actually require a diminishing step size of gamma t equal to 1 over 1 plus t. But I think in practice people often use constant step size and it works just fine, right? So I think this is again an important piece to keep in mind, that it will converge. Okay, so one more slight caveat is that typically we also use the stochastic gradient descent. So in the last lecture we saw the full gradient descent, right, where we compute the gradient of this entire term. So this is a full gradient descent, right? So this term is the full gradient. But you can also compute the stochastic gradient. So stochastic gradient is, instead of using all the m over here, right? So the sum over m, and if m is very, very large, then computing one gradient can be very expensive. Right? So the idea of stochastic gradient descent is that I don't want to use all the data, the entire data set. In fact, we'll kind of go over stochastic gradient descent a little bit in one of the extra lectures probably that I put out, right? But the kind of basic idea of stochastic gradient descent is that I don't want to use all my data set, my entire data set to compute the gradient. I can approximate it using just a few points, typically one point table, right? So I just sample one n. Okay, so I think that's the idea over here. So we approximate the gradient by sampling a few indices, and even as few as one, uniformly at random, and averaging, right? So I'm basically averaging this quantity, which is this sum over m points, by taking a much smaller point, but by taking this much smaller k set of points and summing over k, right? And the kind of critical piece over here is that I need to uniformly at random sample from 1 to n. Okay, so I think this piece is, and oftentimes capital K is even used as one, right? So again, you can actually show the stochastic gradient descent also theoretically converges, right? So I think theoretically also we are all good here, and in fact the perceptron algorithm was an instance of, in fact, stochastic gradient descent, right, in 1957, which is kind of weird, even though at that time maybe the authors didn't really know about stochastic gradient descent and kind of the perceptron loss as much, or maybe they do. I've not actually gone through the paper that carefully to check it out, but nevertheless, I think the kind of main piece is that there's this kind of cool connection that, in fact, the perceptron algorithm is and a stochastic gradient descent algorithm with the perceptron loss, right? So the algorithm is very simple. I choose the mth data point, right? That's what I'm saying over here. We pick a random observation n and we perform the following updates. So we update wt plus 1 equal to wt plus gamma t ym xn, right? If the point is misclassified. And similarly for vt. But if the point is correctly classified, I do nothing. I don't update the weight. I just use the same set of weights moving forward. So the perceptron algorithm is very, very straightforward if you think about it, right? If my example is misclassified, I do something about it, right? But if it's correct, I don't need to do anything about it. It's just it's printed correctly. I should not ideally do anything, right? So I think from that perspective, also perceptron algorithm makes sense from what it is doing. So this is kind of simple example of perceptron in 2 dimensions, right? So in this case, the current separating hyperplane. So my current parameters w comma b are basically over here, right? And with this w comma b, this point is actually misclassified, right? So that means that this region is the negatives, this region is the positives, but then I have one negative over here in the positive region, right? So it's misclassified. So I need to do something about it. So I will leave the other examples untouched and only focus on this example. And because this example is here, I will actually move my decision boundary now a little bit towards this example. So I'll move it a little bit down now, right? So before the update, this was a step. After the update, maybe it kind of moves a little bit too much in this direction, right? So now actually I have 2 examples which are misclassified. Okay. So then the perceptron will probably try to move it a little bit in this direction so that I finally get something like this, right? So this might be the final decision boundary, which basically is the optimal solution, right? Because it kind of the data set over here is like linearly separable, so I can actually run perceptron till the end and finally get a decision boundary that separates this, right? So I cycle through the data points xi, yi, and if xi is misclassified, then I update this, otherwise I don't do anything, right? Do this until all the data is classified correctly. Okay. So, okay, I think with this we will end the part 2, and then we study a little bit more now on the drawbacks of perceptron, right? And probably extending perceptron to like richer features, like polynomial features, etc., right? And I think this will basically set the bed for us for the next lecture, which is support vector machines. Okay. Thank you.